Welcome to 502 Conversations. I'm Brian Kirby, and my guest today is Carlos Orsi, an award-winning journalist. Carlos has more than 30 years of experience of science writing, and he is a co-founder of IQC, a Brazilian NGO dedicated to promoting science-based public policies, critical thinking, and scientific skepticism. Carlos is the chief editor of the Brazilian Skeptic magazine Revista Questão de Ciência, and his writing has also appeared in Skeptical Inquirer and The Skeptic. And you can read Carlos on his Substack channel, Idea Smasher. Carlos is also the first author in a new series of books, the What Science Says series, and his book is What Science Says About Astrology, which is what we will be discussing today. Carlos, thank you so much for being here. I hope that you are well.
Oh, thank you for having me. Perfectly fine, and I'm quite excited to be here and then talk about the book and the series with you.
Great. Actually, that's my first question. So What Science Says series, it's a new series of books. Yours is the first. So what's the genesis of this series? Why did this come about?
Well, this is an idea that Natalia Pasternak is my life companion, and she's a professor at Columbia University right now. We are both from Brazil. And we always had this idea that creating a series of books that would discuss things that are scientific consensus, but about which there is some kind of social controversy. There is a social perception that such subjects are controversial, but they really aren't. There is a very strong and clear scientific consensus around them. So we always had this idea that we should have a series of books explaining these subjects, exploring the roots of the false controversies around them, and explaining the scientific consensus in a clear and easy language for everyone who is curious, who really want to go deep into the subject. When we arrived in the US, Natalia, she came here at an invitation of Professor Stuart Firestein from Columbia, who is also a writer of science popularization books, who wrote Ignorance. It was a big success, his first science popularization book. And we three together, we proposed the series to Columbia University Press. They embraced the idea, and well, we started inviting authors, but we wanted the series to be launched as soon as possible. So I say, okay, let me write the first one. So I'm also one of the editors of the series, and we went for astrology, right? Which we believe it's really a good poster subject for the series. It's something that society in general and the media, the mainstream media treat as sometimes controversial. Oh yeah, the science isn't clear about it and blah, blah, blah. But really, there is a very strong scientific consensus that astrology doesn't work. It's a pseudoscience. It's a superstition. And okay, so let's deal with it and the first entry of the series.
Okay, so I was going to ask why this book, Astrology. So you answered that question for me, which is great. Overall of the series, I'll come back to that in 1 second, but overall in the series, who's the target audience? You said for everyone that's curious, but is this, children? Is it adults? I mean, what's the target audience here?
Well, we try to keep the level of complexity I like to think that anyone from middle school up, so teenagers to adults, that have and everyone who has a kind of serious, deep curiosity about these subjects. Because, I mean, in today's multi-mediated and social network, the world, it's very easy to get sort of dumped in information, misinformation, and when you ask, Google or something like that, some subject like astrology or perhaps even creationism and things like that, you get lots of answers, and you don't have a reference to know which sources deserve credibility, which doesn't. So we are trying to, with the series, we are trying to reach people who are sincerely and deeply curious about the subject, who really don't know what to think about it because they are overwhelmed in the media landscape, in the misinformation landscape. And I think that our project with the series is to help these people to really cut to the chase and get the real information in a as a simple in a simple way, but also without leaving, because it's very easy when you get to a subject like astrology, just dismiss it, right? Okay, no, it's pseudoscience, it's superstition, you don't have to think about it. But if people are really in the crossroads, if they want to know why it's a pseudoscience, why it's considered a superstition. And that's the level of depth that we try to achieve with the series without chasing people away. I mean, oh no, it's too deep. No, it's not too deep. I think that if you really has a serious curiosity about the subject, you'll find the books informative and respectful, and it will tell you what you need to know, what you want to know.
All right, we've got the target audience for the series and why you started with astrology, but I need some definitions here because I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, because in your book it came out maybe we're not talking about the same thing. So what is astrology? Can you define it? Because to me, when I was a kid, it was just something I read in the paper, right? It was my little column. In grade school, I'd read it. It had some advice, quote, right? Yeah, you'll have opportunity for success. Keep your mind open so you recognize your chance. Something vague like that, right? So that's what astrology was to me, just the horoscope. But what's the real definition here of astrology? To astrologers, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the problems, not only with astrology, but with lots of subjects like astrology. You can change the goalposts and make subtle changes in definition, so it becomes hard to really catch it. So the definition I adopted in the book is the one that appears in the classic Sean Carlson paper in Nature, that was published in Nature in 1985. It was a test of astrology, a statistical test of astrology, and it defined it as the belief that the position of some astronomical objects, usually the sun and the planets of the solar system, in the sky at the moment of your birth, give valid, useful information about your personality and the events you may expect to meet during your life. That's the capsule definition that I use.
And where the bodies are in the sky affects your life. Astrology, I mean, isn't it simple that astrology originated as geocentric? The Earth is the center of the universe and it's stationary and things move around us, okay? But now we know that's not true. So why wasn't that the end of it? What happened?
Well, there is this concept, amorphousness, if there is such a word, of astrology, that they just keep changing the goalposts and the definition. So they say, okay, yeah, now we know that the stars aren't where the classic astrologers thought they were. There is the movements in the sky that they didn't take into account. There are more planets than they believed. Now we know that the Earth isn't the center of the universe. But they will say, if you compute the positions and then you associate it with events in people's lives, you can see that it works. So even if the framework is outdated or doesn't really corresponds to physical reality, it is still a framework that when you study what is projected there, it still brings relevant information. That's what they say. And well, we know it doesn't, but it takes time to show it doesn't.
So if you're saying astrology, or if you're saying they're saying that astrology brings relevant information, so at the risk of making this a very short conversation, if astrology is science, Shouldn't there be a test to compare expertise and compare accuracy of predictions among practitioners? Because science, broadly speaking, the great thing about it is whatever it is, it makes a prediction, and then you can devise a test eventually to see if that prediction comes true. So if A equals, if A, then B, no B, so not A kind of thing. Like if you test a medicine, like, you take two groups and say this medicine, there'll be no difference between groups of headache pain if they take this medicine or if they don't. You can devise a test for that, right? That's science. You can make a prediction and then you can test it. What about testing astrology with predictions?
There are 2 points that we can discuss about it. First one, when you can pinpoint a specific prediction and you can test it and you can see that it doesn't work. I mean, it fails again and again and again, not only between astrologers, but if you get the general rules of astrology, what they tend to say that, okay, people who are born in such and such periods of time will tend to be more brash and violent, for instance. And then you make huge populational statistical studies to say, okay, so let's see if there is an excess of people born at this period in the military or in police forces or even in prisons because, okay, violent behavior, perhaps they were going to become criminals. And you don't find it. And it fails and again and again and again. So you have solid statistical evidence that astrology doesn't work. But that's one of the arms of the question. The other arm of the question is that it's very hard to pinpoint specific astrological affirmations that can really be tested because, I mean, if there is astrology, I think it should be considered an art, a form of perhaps of literary art, a form of literature, because the way they use language, they seem to be saying something concrete, but when you try to pin down, they really sort of aren't. But they build their sentences and their discourse in a way that it seems right most of the time, or better saying, if after something happens, you can retrofit the facts into the prediction in a very plausible way. I think there is an example I give in the book, that's my favorite one, when a British astrologer in the 1930s, he made a prediction that there would be problems, there would be earthquakes and problems with aircraft. And then an airship, a British airship, a huge airship, a balloon, crashed down and I think more than 40 people were killed. And he was right, his prediction was on the mark. It really wasn't. I mean, the date preceded, first, it was generic. There will be problems with aircraft. Okay, so it could have been an airplane, it could have been anything. It could have been an airport closing due to a storm or anything. Okay, so an airship fell. But so it was generic. He was wrong about the date. He said it would happen in a certain week. It happened the week before. But even though the guy got a lot of credit and he became a kind of superstar. So really pinpointing what to test, how to evaluate an astrologer or astrology in general can be hard. But when you do it, when you find a way to do it, it doesn't work. But really, it's really, really good into giving the appearance that it works.
Going from generalities like that to specifics, because you mentioned looking at, we'll come back to crunching numbers and statistics, but you mentioned, are people under a certain sign more likely to be in prison or violent or successful or whatnot. But let's go right down to something very specific and obvious. Twins, right? You mentioned twins in the book. This comes up a lot. So twins, or even if you could take a metropolitan hospital like you're in New York that has, 20 births within, a minute of each other probably, right? I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm sure there's a lot of births at the same time every day in a huge hospital in New York. But even if we just go right to twins, they don't have the same lives. So how does astrology counter that specific?
Well, they try to change the subject, really. But yes, there is the question of time twins. People who are born so close to each other in time that if you are going to draw their natal charts, the astrological map of their skies, of their lives, they will be identical. And yes, these people have very different lives, but what astrologers say about that is they have two strategies. First, they get a few cases in which the lives of time twins are coincidental. Of course, there are going to be some because given the number of people there in the world and and they use it. See, time twins really have very close lives. And the other strategy is they use metaphors. I mean, there is this case, I think it was a few centuries ago, when there was a king, a heir to a throne, and the son of a soap maker that were time twins. And they say, see, they were both going to be kings in their worlds. The guy who was born in the royal family became literal king of the country, and the son of the soap maker was going to be the king of soap or something like that. So when we start stretching interpretations that way, you can really create a lot of cases. But this question of time twins is one of the things that's used against astrology since ancient times. People sometimes tend to think, oh, astrology was respected during most of human history, of Western history, and then came the scientific revolution, and then people started thinking, talking bad things about it. Not true. I mean, if you get some of the greatest thinkers of Western philosophy and history, they dished astrology. Cicero, the great Roman senator and politician, he used the argument of time twins, and he used another argument that was, did all the people who died in the same battle had the same horoscope? Because they had the same fate. They died by violence at the same day. And of course not. And Augustine, Saint Augustine, one of the great Christian theologians, he documented a case of time twins that had very different lives. The son of a wealthy man and the son of a slave woman. And the son of the wealthy man had an amazing life. He got luxury. He got to enjoy the life of a member of the elite in the Roman Empire. And the son of the slave woman was a slave and had the life of a slave in the ancient world, which wasn't a great life. So these arguments against astrology, they have been pointed out by thinkers and philosophers as long as there has been astrology. And this is something that we have to admire on astrology. I mean, they have survived 3,000 years with very smart people pointing out that what they say doesn't make sense. And I mean, there's some merit in there, I suppose.
Let me pick up on something you just said about Cicero, ancient times, kings, because if we take a step back to ancient astrology, emperors, kings, people in power, they would use astrologers to derive charts of other important people. And then if the chart indicated that that person was a potential threat to the sitting king or the emperor or whatever, they might initiate a preemptive strike against that person. So people could be killed or marginalized because astrology predicted them as a threat. And the reverse, you know, the less powerful might use astrology to determine a good time to incite a coup. That's like a very dark side to astrology.
Yes, I mean, I think that's one thing. When people, one thing I got asked a lot is why astrology? It's fun. I mean, what was the problem if people believe in it and well, they're just going to read the horoscope and laugh it out? But I think what I say is, I mean, there is no unwarranted belief. There is no system that purports to explain the world that is fake, that is really innocuous, inoffensive, harmless. I mean, because if people take a wrong idea, a silly idea, serious enough, they will act upon it, and it's going to be, and acting upon silly things, acting upon really unwarranted beliefs, sooner or later is going to get you in trouble, or is going to make you do things that will put other people in trouble. In the ancient world, astrology had two functions, served two functions depending on the context. In the Roman Empire, in the early Roman Empire, it was very noticeable. First is reducing the sense of uncertainty that people had. I mean, in the Roman Empire, you think, oh, no, there were dynasties of emperors, and there really weren't so much dynasties. Most imperial succession was by coup, by murdering the previous emperor, by convincing the military to remove the other guy, by murder. So to be a person of power in the Roman society was a very dangerous thing. And they felt very insecure, and astrology gave them two things. First, a sense of safety, because, okay, so the astrologer said I can sleep tonight without a dagger under my pillow. Okay, so I will. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But it also gave you a very strong propaganda tool. If you could convince a large number of people that, see, I have an imperial horoscope, perhaps it would tilt the balance in your favor. And the emperor knew that. So, okay, so this guy has a good horoscope. He can use it as a political propaganda weapon to try to start a conspiracy or something. So they would make a preemptive attack. As emperors in Rome, they would, I mean, there are several decrees expelling astrologers from Rome, the city of Rome, and even from Italy. Of course, the court astrologer of the emperor was exempted from this exile decree, but because it was a kind of political force that they feared and they couldn't control. And this is a parallel with what happened in Nazi Germany. Also, there is all this, did Hitler really believe in astrology, or he was just using it for propaganda purpose and blah, blah, blah. This is a discussion that's going on today. But the fact is, the Nazis try to control what the horoscopes, what astrology magazines and stuff could or couldn't publish, could or couldn't say, because they feared. They wanted to use it as an instrument of propaganda, of communication control, and they feared that their enemies would use it against them. It was illegal in Rome to make to publish an horoscope of the emperor, and in Nazi Germany you couldn't publish an horoscope of the leaders of the party.
That's really interesting, because when you think, Rome 2,000, 3,000 years ago, okay, superstition, right. When you think only 75 years ago, using it for the same purposes, we're already flying, and just think of the technology at the time. But then, again, as you're saying here, it was used as a propaganda tool. So I was going to ask, at what point did it go from prophecy and predictions in ancient times, like you suggested, to all about personality and life counseling? So there seems to be a switch there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, astrology always had this tendency to deal with personality, because it was used in ancient times. For instance, when a child was born, what can I hope for my kid, what it will be? So it always had a certain component of personality analysis. This is something that some historians say, that if you one way to study what the prejudices the ancient peoples had see what kind of traits they attributed to bad astrological configurations. There are some configurations that are canonically considered of ill omens and things, but what people say that these configurations mean changes with time depending on the prejudices of the time. They always mean something bad, but what people consider bad changes. But there was a big switch from prediction to personality analysis. It came in at the beginning of the 20th century in England, because the British police, for some reason at that time, the early 20th century, started to really enforce a law they had against fortune telling. So if you and the way the law was worded, fortune telling was making predictions about future events to people for money, something like that. So astrologers, to avoid going to jail, they de-emphasized the predictive side of their work and hyper-emphasized the personality analysis, and it really, I mean, and it was, besides being a survival strategy to escape the police, it also became a very good marketing coup. I mean, that's what astrology is all about today, right? Oh, I'm dating a guy, but he's such and such sign, so it makes him whatever, so I think I'm going to break up with him. And people will obsessively read astrology magazines and consult websites to try to understand themselves and make sense of the happenings in their lives, but not in terms of what's going to happen next, but why is this happening to me? What kind of person I am? What kind of people I'm dealing with, and how this explains my situation in life. It became a whole new market niche for astrology.
When you mentioned people look to astrology magazines, or if they're in a relationship, they want some kind of advice about, oh, this guy or my partner or whatever, looking at that advice, I think it was in your book you told the story about Alan Leo, right, who's responsible for a lot of the modern astrology. But when he got deathly ill, he predicted his own quick recovery, but he actually got worse and died. So when the modern founder, it must be the expert, can't get accuracy about himself and what's going to happen, that's not the end of astrology. I mean, things like that happen again and again. So they may predict their own relationship success but fail. They may predict getting better but die. How does that compute in the head, I guess?
Well, there is this. I mean, you can always, given a fact, you can always, the way astrology in general use language, given an outcome, you can always find something in something some astrologer said beforehand that predicted that. Or that can be made to mean that it was predicted, like in the case of their ship that I described earlier. So if you predict something and it doesn't happen, oh well, I misinterpreted. It was my mistake. I mean, there is the mistake is never of astrology. It is of the reading that is made. If you get a full astral chart, or natal chart, how they call it, it has 9 planets, because they still use Pluto. It can have 2 or 3 asteroids, depending on the astrologer you are consulting. There's the moon, there's the sun, and there's their positions in the sky. There are the angles between them. The number of signifying items in an astral chart is amazing. I mean, it can get to hundreds, if not thousands, of significant points. And it's the responsibility of the astrologer to identify which of these significant points really mean something, which are relevant for the situation, which aren't, and interpret. So they can always say that the mistake was from the interpretation. It wasn't from the astrologer himself. And the way they build their readings is very subtle. So the same phrase can be read in different ways depending on what happens later. I think that this power to always or almost always be cogent when you look backwards is one of the things that keep astrology in business, that has kept astrology in business for so long.
All right. You mentioned crunching numbers or something earlier, so I want to go back to that because now we have this massive computing power. I mean, I have to be very careful how I ask this question because you can do a study that comes out negative, but then you can look through the data and you can always find something that happened, right? But then if you test that properly, it's not a success either. But you can find it, you can data mine and look, you can find something everywhere. Okay, so I have to be careful about this. And you can help me too, I guess. So with computing power, you can take massive statistics for an entire population and crunch numbers. So have there been any successes that come out of astrology? I mean, is there any kind of specific merging of signs that points to people are better poets or they're better doctors or they're actors? Is anything specific? And with the realization that subgrouping, I mean, you could find that, oh yeah, people born under a certain sign, they're better at planting roses or something, right? So, but is there any success? And with all those caveats I mentioned.
No, I think that there's one example that was a puzzle for decades. When you did the number crunching and tested for, okay, so it might be perhaps is an artifact of the data, and but the effect sort of survived a lot of critical analysis in the original data set. When we try to reproduce it in more modern data sets, it vanished, but in the original data set, it seemed to be a real puzzling. That was the Mars effect that psychologist, French psychologist Michel Gauquelin found out in the mid of the 20th century, analyzing data from the late 19th century and early 20th century. That, I mean, it was very puzzling because first, it wasn't an astrological effect in the sense of classic astrological rules. I mean, astrology said, okay, so people born with the sign of Aries in some proeminence will be more extroverted and perhaps violent and He didn't find this kind of effect that classic astrological rules would predict. But he found that certain positions of certain planets, specifically Mars, that became called the Mars effect, seemed to correlate in a way that was more than predicted by chance with professional success in some areas. In an European cohort from the late 19th and early 20th century. And he couldn't explain that, and people who try to make, there are a lot of criticism to his work, and yeah, you could say that he was fishing because he got the data and then he started looking for things and he found it. But even people applying statistical corrections, the effect wouldn't go away. But one thing clues that there was something else going on. When births started to happen in hospitals, the effect vanished. I mean, people were used to be born at home, and then their parents would declare the date and time of birth. They would go to a magistrate or something to get the birth certificate, or to the priest or whatever. And when the parents stopped making the declaration and it started to be done by doctors in hospitals, the effect vanished. And then researchers, using this as a clue, they arrived at this hypothesis that today is the best hypothesis to explain the Mars effect, was that some people, not many people, because the size of the Mars effect is vanishingly small. It's above chance, but it's very, very slightly above chance. That some minority, but a significant minority of people, were lying about date and time of birth because of superstition. Oh, no, my son can't be born at midnight. My son cannot have been born in the 13th or something like that. And this distortion, and this usually happened in families that were professionally preeminent, because perhaps their parents didn't want, professional success was highly hereditary, right? You would inherit your father's law practice or your father's medical practice or something. They didn't want their children to start in life with a handicap, even if based on superstition. So these people who were already predisposed to be successful had their dates and times of birth sometimes altered to avoid having an unlucky birthday or an unlucky time of birth. And this was the real cause of the Mars effect. So it seemed to be some kind of astral effect, but it really was a social effect. And I think that it's something that has to be very well controlled when you are studying astrology. Another social effect that was found in more than I think it was the early 70s, when they started asking people a group of researchers asked people to do personality inventories, personality questionnaires. And they started, okay, so these people who astrology says they should be extroverts, their personality inventory say they are extroverts. So, wow, it seems that astrology works. But then we controlled for astrological knowledge of the people doing the questionnaires. The effect vanished. So the conclusion was that people who knew what was expected of their personalities because they were the astrology buffs, so they knew, okay, so I was born at such and such month, so I should be an extrovert or an introvert. They would fill the questionnaire according to their signs. But people who didn't know their astrological sign or didn't take astrology seriously, they wouldn't do the questionnaire in an astrological convenient way. So these social effects, they can really confuse the situation when you are testing astrology in populations.
So that's confusing the situation there. The belief leads to the reality in the first one. People don't want to be related to the superstition, so they fudge the record. And then the other one where people that know what's going on, they kind of cheat on the test a little bit. Okay. But give me one of in general, you said earlier it's survived for 3,000 years. So one of my favorite chapter there was chapter 3, Why It Seems to Work. And there's a lot of information in there, but I'm wondering if you can just give me a couple of examples why it seems to work. Why it seems to work and why people can fit it into their ideas.
Well, the first thing, I see, and that's a evidence-based assessment. Is that astrology is very, very good in applying what is called the Fodor effect or the Barnum effect, which is the tendency of people to read generic and sometimes even obviously true for whole populations statements as specific for them. they fill in the gaps. I mean, one of my favorite of the so-called Barnum statements is you have talents and potentialities in your life that you haven't fully explored yet. I mean, I think it's people will say, "Whoa, it's everybody." But I mean, but what is what for me is amazing in this statement is that it's a different thing for anyone because okay, so what's my unfulfilled talent? Perhaps isn't the same as yours or of anyone in the audience. So what enters your brain is the generic statement, but you transform it inside your mind in a very specific one. Oh yes, I never played an instrument in public, and I am so good with my violin at home. And or yeah, I never published any of my poems. Or so this capacity to create statements that are they are expressed as generalities, but are accepted as specifics. I think it's an amazing power that Barnum statements have, and astrology is very, very good in producing them. So that's one of the. I think that's the main reason, and I think that the second reason is that astrology is and in the modern world, I mean, as it was for the people fighting for power in ancient Rome, it is an uncertainty. It has an uncertainty reducing effect, even if it's silliness, it's BS or whatever. It makes you feel in control. It gives you the impression that things make sense. Okay, so my life, things are going bad in my life right now because of Mercury retrograde. So it makes what might be random bad luck look understandable, because I think we as a species we deal very badly with randomness. I mean, I think we are, everybody is sort of structurally paranoid up to a point. We're always looking for reasons for things. That's what brings us to make science, but it's also what turns us into superstitious people, right? We're always looking for reasons for things. And astrology is a system that creates a kind of superstructure that really makes things seem to make sense. And it mimics science up to a point, because there are those charts and angles and calculations, so it looks very serious. It's the Barnum statements, they created this impression that, wow, they are talking to me. And it reduces anxiety, and it reduces uncertainty, the feeling of anxiety, the feeling of uncertainty. And it gives people a framework in which they can try to make sense of things. And it's emotionally rewarding, even if it isn't true.
And I must say, the readings, those Barnum effect readings and the astrology readings, they sort of remind me of mostly psychic readings too, because they're almost always positive. I mean, there's never a reading like, you're a despicable person with murderous tendencies. You like to argue and confront people. You take pleasure in berating others, and you think it's your duty to do so, and you feel you're greatly admired for this. I mean, it's always these kind of positive, flattering statements that happen. So that's another thing that, like, nobody's ever bad. Anyway, all right. But then I had one question, because you mentioned anxiety in there. And one of the things I read in your book, which was very surprising to me, was the merging of, or the attempted merge, and some people still do, I guess, psychology and astrology. That was very interesting, that what is a science, they would find, or some people would find value in using astrology if they have a particularly difficult diagnosis or something. I don't see how that happened. And I don't know if it's still happening now, but I was totally baffled, this blending. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, but I think it isn't exactly psychology. It's some lines of psychotherapy. And psychotherapy, you have, you have everything there. I mean, you have Freudian psychoanalysis, which is a classic example of pseudoscience, right? I mean, it's in the Popper's book on the demarcation problem. You have Freudian psychoanalysis as one of the star examples of pseudoscience. You have Jungian psychoanalysis, which is even crazier than Freudian. So it isn't with psychology as a scientific discipline, but is with certain currents and trends in psychotherapy, which can go from evidence-based therapies like CBT and things like that, and all the way to the most crazy stuff you can imagine. But why there's people who think that astrology can be useful in psychotherapy? I think there's for two main reasons. One is the projective and open-ended character of astrological readings. I mean, as I said, you have hundreds, perhaps thousands of signifiers, and you have this language that's fluid, that says nothing objectively, but subjectively can be understood or made to say anything you want to listen. So this projective character, some people think that it offers an unstructure that helps people to feel less helpless or less lost in the world, because they place their problems inside a framework, and a framework perhaps better than no framework at all. I disagree, but for some people it seems to make and to make sense. And as an anxiety and a way to establish dialogue between therapist and patient, because there is this I discuss it in the book. There is this so-called common factors school of psychotherapy that says, okay, what really matters in a psychotherapy situation is the bond between therapist and patient, is the sincere intention to help the patient, and the presence of some kind of common understanding, of common language between therapist and patient. And this common language can perhaps be anything, and astrology is one thing. Freudian ideas can be another, Jungian ideas can be another, and so on. I think it's dangerous because, again, you start basing behavior in things that have no basis on reality. You end up doing something stupid or dangerous or criminal or whatever. But one thing that, one silver lining, if I can point, is that even in the books that propose astrology as a therapeutic tool, the authors say, okay, this is for people who are moderately confused or lost, or just want some slight guidance. You don't use it to people with serious problems. We're not going to treat schizophrenia with astrology. I mean, even the people who propose astrology as a therapeutical tool, they know that there are things that are serious and require a real scientific-based treatment. But there is this, what's I don't recall the creator of the expression, but I love it, the healthy and well, right? And for the healthy and well, people propose astrology as a tool. I I think it's dangerous because it's based on superstition, but it has its defenders, yes.
Thank you so much for correcting that from psychology to psychoanalysis or psychotherapy. Sorry, I misspoke there. I didn't want to take down a whole. my bad. But thank you so much because that clears that up. Okay, so that surprised me anyway. But when you were writing and doing the research for the book, What Science Says About Astrology, did you find anything that surprised you?
Well, one thing that really surprised me is when I started when I thought about what science says. People, science says about astrology. People say, okay, astronomy and astrophysics. They say that the stars aren't, the constellations aren't where the astrologers say they are. They say that there is no force in nature that can transport the so-called the purported astrological effects to people. I wanted to go a little deeper than that, so I went after social sciences and media studies. And I really got surprised with the amount of media criticism studies on the content of horoscopes, of newspaper and magazine horoscopes. And I got more surprised when I found out that, I knew about Theodor Adorno's, I think everybody has perhaps ever heard of him. He was of Frankfurt School of Social Sciences, the people in Germany that tried to merge Marxism and psychoanalysis and create a new critical theory of society and blah blah blah. And Adorno with Max Horkheimer, they were the creators of the expression culture industry and the criticism of media and pop media and pop culture products and all that. They are the originators of that. He did some work on horoscopes, and he concluded that horoscopes they try to make people conform to their lives. They try to make people passive. They are tools of oppression because they just say to people, keep your head down and do what your boss tells you to do, and da da da. And it surprised me that how all the other content analysis studies about horoscopes made in the decades following, and even outside their theoretical framework of Marxism and da da da, got to the same conclusions, that horoscopes are tools to keep people quiet at their proper places and don't make waves and accept reality, social reality as it is, but don't try to change anything and all that. It really surprised me.
All right, Carlos, I thank you so much for being here. At the risk of spoiling the ending of the book, if you don't mind, I'm going to sum up with one of your quotes from the book. I think people listening to this conversation, they probably know where the book ends up, but there's so much information in the book about our own biases and how we can excuse ourselves and think things work. I recommend it even just for that, but the history of astrology was very interesting. But I will say, I want to sum up with this quote, and I'll extend this to, like any psychic or a medium or ESP person or any telekinesis, every time astrology says something that's clear-cut enough to be objectively tested, it fails. And so at the risk of ruining the ending, I just wanted to put that out there if anyone had any questions about it. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. Your book is What Science Says About Astrology from the What Science Says series. Do you know what other topics are going to be tackled?
Oh yeah, we have already contracted a book about false memories, and we are working on a book. Yeah, and there are going to be vaccines because we are not all the books are going to be about pseudoscience or superstitions. They're going to be about subjects that are seen as controversial in society, but that are not controversial once you look at the science. And vaccines are really case of that. And we are also talking with an author to have one about ghost hunting. And so we are going to from pop culture to deep questions, and from pop culture again, we are going to give the series a nice rhythm.
Great. I look forward to all those books. Hopefully I can speak to those authors as well. My best to Natalia. I hope to see you guys soon.
Yes, hope so too.
All right, Carlos, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Bye.